Hello everyone. Welcome to AgileCast, a podcast series for Agile enthusiasts from Xebia Agile community of consulting and transformation. XACT is a community of seasoned Agile coaches and passionate Agile enthusiasts. We live by our core value of knowledge sharing, which is the only way you learn and care about your community. We have been hosting webinars, meetups, annual conference named Agile NCR, and of late we have started sharing our podcast series which can help our fellow Agile enthusiasts in their learning journey. My name is Anil Kadakol. I am an Agile transformation consultant and coach. In this series, I am going to talk about cognitive biases and how they play out in the context of product management and Agile world. From my experiences of working with various product teams from the last few years, I have often been intrigued to observe the different biases affecting the teams and their decision-making pattern in so many ways. We all take shortcuts at times. Sometimes they help us to get to the destination faster, and many times taking shortcuts leads to negative consequences. This is exactly what happens when our brain takes mental shortcuts. First, let us establish what a cognitive bias is. The mental shortcuts that help us make decisions quickly without spending a lot of time are called heuristics. They are helpful most of the times, but can also lead to errors in judgment when people rely solely on heuristic principles. These errors are called cognitive biases. A cognitive bias is defined as a systematic pattern of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment. We often apply them subconsciously to quickly find a good enough solution to a problem. We all have these biases. They are our brain's way of conserving the energy it takes to deal with the terabytes of information being thrown at us constantly. We connect the dots, make up stories, create patterns with stuff we think we already know to then act as fast as we can. Definitely not a great way for creating product strategies, addressing customer needs, and making complex decisions. Therefore, it's really important for the product managers and the teams to be aware of these cognitive biases, to understand how they work, and to see what can be done about them. Daniel Kahneman is an Israeli psychologist and economist, notable for his work on the psychology of decision making as well as behavioral economics, for which he was awarded the 2002 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. With Amos Tversky, Kahneman established the cognitive bias for common human errors. Somewhere in the 1950s, Kahneman was a young Israeli platoon commander with a psychology degree, was asked to set up a new interviewing system for the army recruitment due to the ineffectiveness of the earlier systems. Kahneman identified 6 dimensions that must be rated one at a time among punctuality, sociability, conscientiousness or diligence, pride, sense of duty, and capacity for independent thought. He mentions it is very important to rate things one at a time. That way you don't form a global impression of the person but a differentiated impression of each dimension. The entire selection process was to consist of generating the 6 scores and then adding them up. When many interviewers complained that he is turning them into robots, Kahneman added a final global rating step as a concession to human intuition. Kahneman's method had deliberate objective steps to overcome what is known by psychologists as the halo effect, and no wonder his new system was met with great success in the army recruitments. The halo effect is when one trait of a person or a thing is used to make an overall judgment of the person or thing. It does support rapid decision making, though it is error prone. The halo effect can also impact organizations and products. If users like one feature of a product very much, they are more likely to judge the overall product favorably in the future. Conversely, if users have a particularly bad experience with one feature, they will predict that the product is poorly designed for other features as well. Let's look at a few cognitive biases for the product teams. Behavioral psychologists have discovered over 200 cognitive biases, and the list is still growing. Let us look at a few common cognitive biases among them. First one, confirmation bias. For example, 2 people on social media may be debating about the existence of global warming. So in the instance of this bias called confirmation bias, each of those people would look to find scientific facts and evidence that supports their theories, rather than making a full and a comprehensive examination of the situation. Confirmation bias refers to our tendency to cherry pick information that conforms to our beliefs and simultaneously ignore information that contradicts our beliefs. For example, when getting user feedback, a product manager may pay more attention to reported issues that fall in line with their personal experience of using the product, or a product manager with a technical background may have a preference to a technical solution that they are more familiar with. In both the cases, objectivity takes a backseat. There are so many areas where this kind of bias is prevalent, and let's see another example. In a daily stand-up meeting for a Scrum team, team members may focus more on the positive information if they believe that the iteration is going good, and vice versa if they believe the iteration is progressing poorly. So this can lead to a development team not acting early enough on the negative trends or falsely acting to do unnecessary course corrections. Reminds me of a quote from Robertson Davies: "The eye only sees what the mind is prepared to comprehend." Let's move on to the next cognitive bias. Survivorship bias. So in the World War II, aircraft losses were high. To reduce the losses, the Allied forces studied planes that returned from the battle to determine additional armor reinforcements. They studied and identified that the bullet holes were concentrated at the wingtips, the center, the tail, but none in the engine and the cockpit regions. And they decided to armor these bullet hole areas. But by neglecting to analyze the planes that did not return, they missed armoring the plane's most vulnerable areas. The bullets hitting the engines and cockpits were proving fatal to bring down the planes. This is the famous example of survivorship bias. We act on the data we have, but don't necessarily compensate for the data that we don't have. The logical error of concentrating on the people or things that survived some process and inadvertently overlooking those that didn't because of their lack of visibility. Survivorship bias refers to our tendency to focus on the winners in a specific area and try to learn from them while completely forgetting about the losers who are employing the same strategy. In the context of product management, survivorship bias is commonly observed in customer research and user behavior analytics. So that is to concentrate and focus on those users who are most active with your product. Active users are more visible, active users are more responsive, and they tend to get overrepresented in the collective data analysis, leading to incorrect conclusions. With respect to a product, non-survivors are those who started using the product and then gave up at some point for some reason. They may not log a complaint, they may not reach out for help, so you lose an opportunity to get their feedback and understand their pain points on the product usability. Let's move on to the next cognitive bias. Anchoring. Do first impressions matter? We tend to be excessively influenced by the first piece of information that we hear, a phenomenon referred to as the anchoring bias. For example, the first number voiced during a price negotiation typically becomes the anchoring point from which all further negotiations are based, so even if it were completely arbitrary. The most common place you hear about anchoring is with pricing. So many of the premium products in marketplace are never expected to sell by themselves, but they serve to anchor your mindset and making mid-range products appear much cheaper than they would on their own. The anchoring bias commonly appears during Scrum estimation efforts. If in an estimation exercise, a development team member prematurely announces the estimate, then the remaining team members are influenced by that and less likely to raise further questions or state an estimate that grossly differs from that of the anchor or challenge the stated estimate. Anchoring can result in poor and inaccurate estimates. This is the reason for planning poker estimation method being adopted in the development teams. Let's move on to the next one. Sunk cost fallacy. Your favorite sports team has shelled out a lot of money to buy a player. The player is not playing well, but since the team has spent all that money, he or she must play every game. Instead of doing what is best for the team and benching the player, the past costs are considered and he or she plays every game. So this is an example of sunk costs fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy occurs when people refuse to abandon a non-viable endeavor that they have invested considerable effort in. This is a mental shortcut that would force us to continue investing time, money, and emotion in a losing activity because of earlier investments. A sunk cost refers to a cost that has already occurred and has no potential for recovery in the future. Consider the following situation. A product or an initiative that month after month does not hit the mark and is not adding any business value consistently, but instead of pausing and reflecting on it or deciding to pivot, more efforts and resources are poured into it in an effort to make it work. The reasoning behind these decisions is that since much resources have already been spent, it must work so that all this effort and money is not thrown away. This bias might be present when product managers continue to add features and capabilities to products that are at their end of life phase rather than retiring them. It hurts to let go, but sometimes it hurts more to hold on. Let's move on to the next one. Authority bias. As human beings, we have evolved over the millions of years as a herd led by a leader. The leader alone or a set of trusted advisors made the big decisions and the rest just followed them. Therefore, we have a deep-rooted sense of duty to follow authority without any kind of questioning. So as a product manager, you need to take decisions daily. You decide the new ideas that will boost revenue, you prioritize features, and you define the KPIs. For all these decisions, many factors are considered like market research and user research amongst many others. Have you seen a feature getting fast-tracked not because of the value it would generate, but because of who was demanding it? Are some features getting pushed into the release planning by skipping the necessary due diligence only based on the input from certain senior stakeholders or experts? If yes, then this qualifies as authority bias. Authority bias is the tendency to place greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure and be more influenced by that opinion. Let's move on to the next one. Risk aversion bias. In 2012, Google launched an initiative named Project Aristotle to investigate hundreds of their teams to find patterns that show why some teams fail while others go on to achieve their best. At the end of the study, they found 5 critical factors. Number 1, dependability, reliance and mutual accountability within the team. Number 2, structure and clarity. High-performing teams have clear goals, defined processes, and well-defined roles within the group. Number 3, meaning of work to an individual. The work has personal significance to each team member. Number 4, impact of work on business and customers. The group believes their work is purposeful and positively impacts the greater good. Number 5, psychological safety. Psychological safety is a belief that everyone is safe to take risks, voice their opinions, and one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up on ideas, questions, concerns, failures, or mistakes. Among all the 5 factors, the psychological safety clearly stood out as a dominant factor for team success, even greater than the meaning of work, the impact of work, and dependability. In the context of product management, the absence of psychological safety creates risk aversion bias. The team or an individual may tend to play safe, become defensive, inflexible, and even take less risks in the first place, even when there are great opportunities ahead. Let's move on to the next one. Local optimization bias. How often we have seen that everyone is busy and doing their best, working efficiently on their tasks, yet the system is delivering slow and not delighting the user. We often think only about what is right in front of us or in our limited confines of boundaries and then act. But our actions also have larger effects which we don't usually consider very well, either due to time or because they happen later on or not clearly visible. This is local optimization bias, which is the tendency of actors within a complex system to do the best thing in the confines of their own duties and roles without understanding the larger impact of their choices and actions or ignoring higher level goals of the system. For example, if product managers or scrum masters only focus on trying to improve the productivity of their teams instead of helping the product or development organization become better able to learn and adapt, then this will be detrimental to the teams and customers in the long run. Let's move on to the next one. Zygarnick Effect. Bluma Zygarnick was a Russian psychologist. She discovered the Zygarnick Effect when she and her professor noticed that a waiter had better recollection of unpaid orders compared to the orders which were already paid. People remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than the completed ones. Once the task has been completed, people cannot recall the task accurately. A task that has already been started establishes the task-specific tension, which improves the cognitive accessibility of the relevant contents. The tension is relieved upon completion of the task but persists if it is interrupted. Things like motivation to successfully complete a task, how fatigued an individual is, and how difficult they believe a task is impacts the recall of an unfinished task. This effect is strongest when people are motivated to complete a task. The video gaming industry uses this effect to their advantage to keep the players hooked. Product designers use this knowledge to hold users' attention and to get them to better understand and derive value from the product features. They do this by number one, providing the users with a perceived sense of progress that invokes a feeling of completed tasks by using visual indicators like progress bars or circles to show progress. Number two, showing progress as steps to be completed rather than completed steps to show a perceived sense of how much is left to be done. So until now, we have seen the kind of impact some of these cognitive biases can cause. What can be done about them? The most difficult part is to even realize that we are currently under a spell of a particular bias, as these operate at a subconscious level. So what can be done about them? Fortunately, there are actions that can be taken to minimize the damaging effects of the biases. Here I am not indicating the specific actions for each cognitive bias that we have discussed, but more on a generic level to develop our ability to overcome them. The first and foremost is developing awareness, being aware of what cognitive biases are, what are the different types, and in what way they can affect judgment is one of the first key steps to help overcome them. Number two, focus on the data. In any situation that demands decision making, focus on the evidence or information without any assumptions. As Daniel Kahneman has said, to make a good decision, delay your intuition until you have gathered all the necessary information. Number three, seeking multiple perspectives is another useful technique. Ideally, you can turn to those you trust, like a family member, a friend, or a mentor who can offer honest and constructive criticism and openly discussing about any blind spots you may have. Number four, diversifying and broadening your network will help in making you less susceptible to these biases. Number five, seeking out contrary data and conclusions. Proactively seeking out contrary data and conclusions to challenge your beliefs is a good technique against some biases. Look for both sides of the story. If there is data that supports a notion, find data that doesn't, or at least try to think in that direction. Number six, developing critical thinking skills, practicing self-reflection and journaling are other few tools which could be adopted. Conclusion. So being able to think clearly and in an unbiased way is an important skill for a product manager and teams. We have seen that the cognitive biases have the potential to derail a product strategy roadmap and to induce an error-prone decision making in so many areas. It is indeed possible to work through to conquer one bias at a time and gradually improve our grasp on many of them. Eventually, we will grow less susceptible to these biases. This will help us to make improved decisions to create a winning product with delighted users and thereby be truly agile.